Welcome everyone, this is On Just Restart, and today I want to talk about the possibility of Metroid Dread winning Game of the Year at the Game Awards this year. Now, I've been talking about for a while how I think Metroid Dread could get nominated for Game of the Year, and maybe it has a chance to do it. And now, well, we have full confirmation that Metroid Dread is one of the nominees for the Game Awards. So that's pretty exciting. That alone is a big deal for the Metroid series. It suggests that a lot of people are very into this game. A lot of people are very high on this game, and they think it is a quality game that is in the conversation for Game of the Year. And that's special in and of itself. And I'll even say, since it is a nomination, there's going to be some discussion on it. More eyes will be on Metroid Dread this year at the Game Awards, and that will lead to more sales, which is pretty important for the Metroid series because historically, they have not sold well, but the story has been that Metroid Dread is selling pretty well. And with this little extra bit of publicity, the game could end up selling even better, which will mean Metroid Dread will be a pretty strong selling game, and maybe Nintendo will feel like producing more Metroid games with the strong sales we are seeing with Metroid Dread, which, as we've discussed in the channel, there are plans for Metroid Prime 4, and there's the rumored Metroid Prime remake, so it seems like Metroid is definitely in the works, and more Metroid's on the way, and Metroid's going to sell well. But today we're going to focus on if this game can truly win Game of the Year, or if being a nominee is the highest to go. Now before we jump into things, let me very quickly talk about my social media. You may see a few different things here on screen. You can check that all out. It is linked in the description below. And of course, if you like what you're seeing here, you can subscribe. To start things off, let's first talk about how winning Game of the Year would be a great thing for the Metroid series. It would really be a nice little bow on this beautiful narrative for Metroid Dread, a game that has been in development multiple times, canceled and restarted for many years. It is the resurgence of the Metroid series, and it is the best-selling Metroid game ever, or at least it's looking to become that. So with that all in mind, it would be amazing if it's all capped off with a Game of the Year award. That would be incredible. It would be a beautiful thing to see. But there are other games here that are also really good. They are deserving of attention as well, and maybe one of these other games could win Game of the Year. And if Metroid Dread doesn't win Game of the Year, it's not the end of the world. Metroid Dread is already getting a lot of attention, and the fact that it's simply been nominated is a very nice thing already. But this is in large part based off how people feel about it. We have the opportunity to cast our vote, so we can make somewhat of a difference here. Even if the people at the Game Awards don't feel themselves that Metroid Dread is deserving of Game of the Year, if there is enough outcry and votes for Metroid Dread, that might be just enough to pull things in its favor. So you can cast your vote at thegameawards.com. Shameless campaigning aside, let's kind of get into this conversation now. So, the games that Metroid Dread has to compete with are Deathloop, It Takes Two, Psychonauts 2, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, and Resident Evil Village. So, the first thing I want to talk about are Metacritic scores, and while Metacritic scores aren't the be-all end-all, they are a compilation of accredited journalists, and it puts all the reviews together, and you can get a little nice number that gives you a general understanding of what the overall critical reception is of the game. So let's take a look at these games in an order that I sort of put together here. So first we have Resident Evil Village with a Metacritic score of 84 based on 106 critical reviews. Now this is the PlayStation 5 version. I am using the highest reviewed version here with the highest amount of critical reviews. And actually with all the different games, I'm focusing on the versions that have the most critical reviews because that is the largest sample size of what journalists felt about this game. And 84 is its highest score, yet here it is in the Game of the Award nominees. Now, I haven't played every game that has been nominated, but I did play Resident Evil Village. It is a great game. But I'm just tell you straight up right now, it is not nearly as good as Metroid Dread. That is just not the case. It just isn't. Metroid Dread, in my opinion, is something that feels a bit more fresh and new. It's something that has an incredible beginning, an incredible middle, and an incredible end. It ends very well. There are some powerful story beats. There are amazing gameplay moments. It feels very fresh, and it's just so fun to explore with the freedom it offers you in terms of movement and combat and exploration. To me, Metroid Dread is hands down a better game than Resident Evil Village, but I do feel like Resident Evil Village is a very good game and is one of my favorite games that came out this year. Moving on, we have It Takes Two, and again, this is the version that had the most critical reviews with a Metacritic score of 88, which is notably higher than Resident Evil Village, but what is significantly lower are the amount of critical reviews. It's less than half. And I think that does make a big difference here in terms of deciding what should win Game of the Year, because while I do agree that maybe we should simply assess things on the quality of the game, the history shows that it's not always the highest reviewed game that wins Game of the Year. Sometimes, or a lot of the time, popularity plays a vital role. I wouldn't say those are the only two factors, review scores and popularity, but they are both two significant things to consider here. And with this small sample size of critical reviews, it is indicative of just how known this game is to the public, and I do think that's going to impact its chances to win Game of the Year. Another game that I would say is in a similar situation is Psychonauts 2. This is an awesome game, and a score of 87 with 67 critical reviews. There's a few more reviews, so I'd even say that this has a little bit more of an argument for Game of the Year than It Takes Two for that reason alone. But still, compared to some of the other games I'm going to be talking about here, there just aren't that many critical reviews, so I do feel like that's a bit of a ding in terms of its chances towards winning Game of the Year. Deathloop, on the other hand, for the PlayStation 5 version, has a Metacritic score of 88, which matches It Takes Two. However, it has more than double the amount of critical reviews, over 100, so I would say that that definitely puts it in the real conversation for winning Game of the Year. It's a very strong candidate. I could see them picking Deathloop over Metroid Dread. It could happen, it is a possibility. However, Metroid Dread also has a Metacritic score of 88 and 118 critical reviews, so it actually has a few more reviews than Deathloop. So you could argue, with the same score but a larger sample size, that says a little bit more. It suggests that Metroid Dread is more likely to be of that quality, so perhaps the nod should go in Metroid's favor. With just this information alone, I would say that's absolutely the case, but keep in mind, the people who pick this, it's an opinion, it's subjective, it's not 100% objective based off this information. But still, based off the information I'm presenting here, I do feel like Metroid Dread has a minor advantage. But there's another game that you can argue has a minor advantage over Metroid Dread, and that is Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. Now, taking a look here, it also has a Metacritic score of 88, but with 126 critical reviews. So it has a slightly bigger sample size. So the same way Metroid Dread perhaps deserves the nod over Deathloop, you can argue Ratchet & Clank deserves a nod over Metroid Dread for its higher sample size. But it should also be noted Ratchet & Clank has been out for a fair bit longer, and it only has 8 more additional reviews. If Metroid Dread was out in the market for about 4 more months, would there be a sample size similar to Ratchet & Clank? I think so. So with that in mind, I don't think this is really too much of a distinguishing factor here, and I would even say that the difference between Metroid Dread and Deathloop also isn't really that big of a deal. They're all within the same sort of realm. They all have over 100 critical reviews, and they all have a Metacritic score of 88. Unlike It Takes Two and Psychonauts, which have a similar score, but basically only half of the critical reviews, I would say those are just a tick below these other 3 games in terms of its chances to win Game of the Year. I'm not necessarily arguing quality here, simply in terms of its chances to win Game of the Year. Resident Evil Village, I think the very highest it could have gotten was a nomination. I think there are other games that perhaps would have deserved a nomination over Resident Evil Village, and I feel like because of the pedigree of the Resident Evil franchise and its popularity as a series overall, that's why it's even been nominated. These other 5 games are far more deserving, and I would say that the real competition here is between Deathloop, Metroid Dread, and Ratchet & Clank. So how can we distinguish between Deathloop, Metroid Dread, and Ratchet & Clank? Well, one other consideration here are sales, because that sort of speaks to the game's popularity. I don't think that alone is a huge deciding factor, but it's something that could contribute to maybe which game wins the award here. So I don't have hard sales numbers on any of these games yet entirely, but this is what I do have, so if you guys know any more information, please let me know in the comments below. But this is what Christopher Dring had to say on terms of sales for Deathloop when it released. so Deathloop's box sales are lowest for an Arcane game so far. I suspect it performed well with digital sales, but Bethesda doesn't share download figures with the charts companies, so we'll never know. So that quote right there doesn't necessarily bode well for really strong sales for Deathloop, but also it had taken number 1 that week, so I'm not trying to say sales have been really weak, but it doesn't suggest the most amazing thing ever either. Now, as for Ratchet & Clank, as of July 18th, 2021, the game has sold over 1.1 million copies worldwide. And at that point, the game had been out for about a month, so that's pretty good numbers there. Though then, when we take a look at Metroid Dread, based off the month of October, apparently Metroid Dread has sold about 1 million. Now, this is accounting mostly for just US sales, which is about 854,000, and then some physical sales from Japan and Spain. But there are other regions here. We do not have the full numbers on Metroid Dread sales, but I think the point to be made here is that its sales have been very strong for the October period. It's clearly over 1 million already, pretty much in the same realm as Ratchet & Clank when it first came out. So it seems like both these games are selling relatively well, so that could perhaps suggest that both these games have a strong likelihood to win with their pretty good popularity. But of course, Deathloop is still probably performing relatively well as well, so I feel like it shouldn't be entirely discounted here, but there's been more positive reception for Metroid Dread sales, so I kind of feel like Metroid Dread does deserve a bit of a nod here. Now, I don't know the full sales numbers yet. It may be the case that Deathloop and Ratchet & Clank are selling better than Metroid Dread overall. I don't know that. But there is something else to consider here, and that's the narrative. This does play a role, I think, into what happens with Game of the Year. Sometimes it's about the story, and I think Metroid Dread's story is a pretty impactful one. The story for Metroid Dread, as I discussed earlier in the video, Metroid has been a dormant franchise. The concept of Metroid Dread, this game, has been attempted multiple times and cancelled multiple times. It has been basically 2 decades since Metroid 4. This is finally the continuation of the 2D Metroid timeline, and has come back full force, and in a way perhaps better than ever before, because now people are picking up the game. Now people are paying attention to Metroid, and this is suggesting great things for the future of the series. Unlike previous Metroid games, which never really got the attention they deserved, so we didn't get many Metroid games after that, now it's looking like a new audience is building for Metroid, and this could continue forevermore, hopefully. Maybe Nintendo starts to use Metroid the same way they use Zelda or Mario. That would be something special to see, wouldn't it? And Metroid Dread represents that, so that's pretty darn cool. But on top of that, the team that made Metroid Dread, yes, a lot of it was Nintendo, but also it was in conjunction with Mercury Steam, a Spanish developer. They are a smaller developer, but now with the success of Metroid Dread, it's a bit of an underdog or Cinderella story here. And that's also something that I think adds to this nice narrative for Metroid Dread, and I do think that does perhaps increase its chances somewhat to maybe win Game of the Year. Looking back at some of the games that won Game of the Year isn't necessarily the game that sold the most or the game that had the highest reviews on Metacritic. There have been some amazing games that didn't win Game of the Year that did sell really well, that were really popular, and had higher Metacritic scores. Just look at 2019. Super Smash Bros. Ultimate fit all those categories, but didn't win Game of the Year. Sekiro, an amazing game, won Game of the Year. Sometimes there are other factors involved, and there's certainly bias here. So again, if Metroid Dread doesn't win Game of the Year, it doesn't mean it's not an amazing game. All these games that have been nominated are amazing games. So we don't really know what's going to happen. But also, as I said earlier, we have the opportunity to influence what happens here because we can make a vote. And if you feel that Metroid Dread is deserving of Game of the Year, and you likely do because you watched through towards the end of this video, then cast your vote, and maybe Metroid Dread will get that nice little ribbon to tie up this beautiful narrative of Metroid coming back and being amazing and being an experience that is deserving of Game of the Year. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below if Metroid Dread can win Game of the Year, if you want it to win Game of the Year, or if there are other games you would prefer to win Game of the Year instead. Anyways, everyone, this is On Just Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.